All right. So we'll talk a little process and see where that gets us. And again, think about this idea. We're building these levels of our work with the process. So we're going to, with the webinars, we're kind of on these parallel tracks here. We're doing the process piece, and we're going to build some skills with AT. So we'll do a little both, but you know my feeling on process. I was about to dive off on a rant, but I've stopped myself. Process is so important. It's so important. We have to think about how we're doing things. And the idea of today, what I wanted to talk about today is this idea of making sure the work we're doing is making a difference. Are we being effective in some way? Making sure that the pieces we've put in place are doing what we hope they would do. So this is a bit reflective in a sense, which is nice. This also comes from the quiet indicators. This idea of evaluation of effectiveness is what they call this. And so I gave us the definitions. I think that really kind of sums it up nicely as we think about what it is we're going to talk about. The degree to which something is successful in producing a desired result. So how do we make sure that we are moving forward? Even though these don't show up next in the progression, in the quiet indicators, they have a bit of a progression as you move through them. And there are some others that come before this one, but I kind of wanted to drop this one in now because ultimately, each time we layer in another group of indicators, we want to make sure we're being effective. Are we being successful in ensuring that these are making a difference in our work, in our practice? We have our indicators for today. Which again, valuation of effectiveness. Like we looked at the consideration ones, they all have the same format, the range of 1 to 5, 1 being unacceptable, 5 being promising as is practices. So what I'll ask you, either by yourself, or if you're with a group right now, that's even better. Take a look at these, the indicators. So there's 2 pages on this PDF. There are 7 different indicators. Get a piece of scrap paper, talk about each, get a sense of where you guys think you are on each one of these. So let's start with this. Think about this. Indicator 1. So think about the idea of team members and clearly defined responsibilities to ensure that data are collected, evaluated, and interpreted by team members. I like the fact that it says capable and credible. I'm going with the theory that all of us are capable and credible. Credible may be shaky, but at best, but I think we're all capable for sure. Some of us might not be credible, myself included personally. How do we think that happens? This goes back to our idea of our team, right? And so this idea, we have responsibilities. Who's in charge, not in charge, who's part of the team to ensure data is collected? Who talks about the evaluation of that data? The evaluation and the interpretation of the data might be certain members of the team. The collection might be other members of your team. And so when I think about that, the fact that we might have different members of our team, I think especially when I think of collecting of data, there's opportunities or moments where we have paraprofessionals collecting data, and we have people on our team that might not be in the room when we interpret the data, but they're critical to ensure that we get parts of the data. So they are a very integral part of the team. 2, data is collected that has been identified by the team and is related to one or more goals. So this is also about our collection strategies of the team figuring out what data it is we are looking for. You notice the word consistent shows up in this list as well. This idea of finding specific pieces that we can collect data from. So it talks about, and I look at 3, it says team identifies specific student behaviors related to IEP goals, but inconsistently collects data. So that's where they are with 3. This one, the scale's a little interesting on the evaluation of effectiveness, where inconsistent is closer to 3. And then as you start moving up the scale 4 to 5, then you start seeing, even on this one, 4 is generally collects data. 5 consistently collects data. So obviously 5 is where you want to be. If we're in that 3 and 4 range is a good place to be. And to be a 2 on some of these indicators for evaluation of effectiveness, it means we need to do some work there, and figure that out. The idea of 3, which talks about looking at quantitative and qualitative measurements of changes as well, goes back to that idea of what is the data you are collecting? How are we making sure that we are looking at the types of data that are necessary in order to get a good sense of whether these tools or strategies are appropriate and whether we're on the right path for something. So keeping that idea, and that goes back to this idea of what is good data collection, which is we talk about all the time. What are ways that we can ensure that we are getting quality information from our teams? Effectiveness is evaluated across environment. The idea of we're collecting data in the environments that the student is reporting or the team is reporting that the student's struggling in. I'm not going to bring a student into a separate room to test and see how things are going with the tool, but can I find a way in that environment during activities that are naturally occurring to ensure that that student is being successful, or what are the areas that are still struggling with? 5, so the data is collected to provide teams with a means for analyzing achievement and identifying those supports and barriers. So figuring out, are these pieces, are the AT tools going to be beneficial when we look at achievement, supports, barriers, all these environmental pieces that could have an impact on the student's success with those tools. And again, looking at how we analyze that data. 6, changes are made in the student's services and program. And I think that's something that we do quite a bit, obviously, when we look at IEPs. Are we doing that consistently across the basis of all these tools and supports for students? So again, thinking about this in the context of AT devices and services that we're putting in place for a student. Is it an ongoing process? So again, looking at that will start to become closer to a 5 as you continue to build your process. And I think what's interesting about this again gives you the overarching, this is what we want to make sure we are continuing to be effective. And so I want you to think about this piece every time I layer another topic in, when we talk about AT and the IEP, when we talk about AT assessment and all those pieces, this evaluation of effectiveness will still have an impact on how we look at those and how those are successful for our teams or not. Think about your consideration process. Have you been talking to other members of your teams about that? Have you been talking to the other educators, the other professionals that you work with? This idea of determining effective consideration. With everything we do with these indicators, again, these are no different. Reflect on how they make your system better. That's the whole point of these. The whole point of these indicators is to have us looking at our system, the way we do things, not stuff, but the idea of the ways that we do things. And that's what's so important about this process. So I would ask you to continue to reflect on this, whether you have to print these out and stare at them. I know I do that every once in a while. I print them out so I can write notes on them and things. Think about how it is that you're going to put these together so that these start to become, in essence, a guidebook to help you move through your system process, and how that looks and how you deliver service.